What's up, guys? Let's talk about, I'm really lounging in this couch right now. It's pretty comfy. It's comfy doing these videos at home. SEO nerd alert. This is going to be a video about a pretty deep topic in SEO. Chances are, if you're not really deep into SEO already, you're not going to find a ton of value out of this. Trigger warning, or whatever you want to call it. Now's the time to shut it off if you're not into super nerdy, deep SEO stuff. So if you are, join me on this adventure. I wanted to talk about something that is, I think, crucial. So I talk about brand awareness being a key component, a key ranking factor in SEO. And I talk about how if you don't have some level of brand awareness, you're probably just not going to be able to rank until you build that brand awareness outside of the least competitive of niches. And I've seen that pretty extensively in our work. But a few years ago, I think this was in 2017. I don't know how I missed this. I only just found out about this like a year ago, if that. SEMRush did a ranking factors study, which you're probably familiar with if you've made it this far in this video. And the problem I have with ranking factor studies in the past is first of all, they're all correlational. They're not causational. And we know that you can never, ever, ever, under any circumstance, ever imply causation from correlation. It's not the same thing. So what do studies do? Studies give us correlation. And so they point us in a direction. Essentially what studies do is they point us in a direction for exploration. We say, hey, that's an interesting correlation. Let's go see if that's true. Let's run experiments and see if that's true. And so they're useful in that way, but they are not at all causational. I think that's I really grind that point home because, I mean, if you read almost any ranking factor study out there, they all imply causation. Almost every single one I've ever read is like, like the conclusion is like, well, meta titles were the number one factor that we found. And so keyword in the meta title must be something you should do to get ranked. That's not a conclusion you can draw from correlation. So SEMRush did a ranking factors study. And like I said, I believe this was 2007. They looked at a list of ranking factors, and what they found was that the number one factor that determined rankings was direct traffic. If you look at the comments, I think on that post, and then also I think I saw these comments on Twitter as well, people were like arguing that direct traffic couldn't possibly be a ranking factor because Google has no way to measure direct traffic. How is Google going to measure direct traffic? Unless they're like spying on your Google Analytics or something like that, which we don't think they are. And so how could it be a ranking factor if Google's not spying on that? I think, first of all, that conclusion is just a misunderstanding of the difference between correlation and causation. Any ranking factor study, any study at all, is a correlation between certain things. So any study is not concluding that direct traffic is causing high rankings. The study is only concluding that direct traffic correlates with high rankings. In other words, a lot of the high ranking sites also have a lot of direct traffic. That's not really what you should conclude. That said, I also understand why people do that because, like I said, all the studies sort of imply that there's a causal effect here, and that's just not something you can conclude. It makes sense why people reading those studies would draw that conclusion that even the authors are basically drawing. Now, I think in the SEMRush study, they were fairly careful to not draw that conclusion. Although if I remember, I haven't read it in a little bit, but if I remember right, they were a little wishy-washy about it. I think at one point they specifically say correlation is not causation, but then I think later on they say like, well, you should probably try to get more direct traffic, or they do something like that, and it's like they confuse the issue. So I understand why people drew that conclusion, but you can't draw that conclusion from any study at all. All you can do is say, interesting, these are correlated. Maybe there's something there. Let's explore it. But I actually think that SEMRush ranking factors study was the best ranking factors study to date. That's all that stuff, all those caveats aside. And the reason I think that is because of the data source that they used. They used Clickstream Data, which is data from a company that essentially what they do is they install their software on millions of computers somehow. So like usually through like some kind of toolbar, or maybe they have like a relationship with software vendors where they sort of like sneak their code into that software, and that allows them to track what a bunch of people are clicking on at all times, what they're searching, what they're clicking on, what websites they're visiting, whether they're going direct to the website or they're going through search. So they can get all this data, and that's called Clickstream Data. And so the interesting thing about the SEMRush factor study is that they used Clickstream Data to basically do the same thing that everybody else has done, which is correlational study. The difference is using Clickstream Data versus everybody else looks at the top ranked sites and does the study based on those top ranked sites. So, looks at how many of the top ranked sites have the keyword in the meta title, how many of the top ranked sites have, how many backlinks on average do the top ranked sites have. Instead of doing the top ranked sites, they use Clickstream Data to get all of this information about the sites, and then also looked at how those sites were ranking in search. So they layered this extra data on top. And what's amazing about that is it just gives you that extra step. It gives you this measure of what people are actually doing rather than just looking at what's ranking. Because before, if you're doing a ranking study correlation, all you're doing is you're saying, here's a list of things I think influence rankings. How many of those things, how prevalent are those things amongst all the pages that are ranking in search? If my list is flawed, the whole study is flawed. That assumes that my list is the accurate list of ranking factors and that I'm chopping them up in the right way. I'm gonna find sites using the keyword in the meta title, even if the keyword has nothing to do, has no influence on rankings at all. Even if keyword in the meta title has no influence on rankings, I still might find that. That study is very dependent on my list, whereas that you have to come up with it in advance. And you still kind of have to do that, but the Clickstream Data gives you a little bit more information. And it goes into more detail too. We can't say how much direct traffic any of these other sites has using the old ranking factors study methods. But we can do that with Clickstream Data because we have that data point now. How much direct traffic are these sites getting? And so what's interesting about that study, and why I think it's the best study to date, is it does use that Clickstream Data, that factor about direct traffic. This is a great example of how correlation works and what I think is actually happening there. So it's not that direct traffic, it's not that Google is measuring direct traffic and then saying, all right, this site has a lot of direct traffic, let's rank it. Direct traffic is correlated with rankings because direct traffic is also correlated with other stuff that causes rankings. So what do sites with extremely high brand awareness have? They have a lot of direct traffic. Think about it. eBay.com, right? If you're going to go shop for something used, right, buy used sporting equipment, you probably are not going to Google used sporting equipment. You're probably either going to go direct to Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or eBay.com. You're not going to go Google used sporting equipment because you already know where to go to find that stuff. And that's because those sites have big brand awareness. So eBay.com probably has an enormous amount of direct traffic. And this applies to kind of across the board. I mean, there's some variation there for sure, but direct traffic is actually a fairly decent measure of brand awareness. And so what I think is happening and what I think that study's picking up in its correlation is that high brand awareness causes high direct traffic. But high direct traffic is not causing high rankings. High brand awareness also causes these user behavior signals that Google can measure, such as click-through rate and brand name searches in Google search and things like that. Brand awareness causes those signals to increase, and those signals cause rankings to increase. And so what you see is that you see direct traffic tied over here to brand awareness, and both of those increase. They're correlated, so they both increase at the same time. And then you also see brand awareness and user behavior signals increase at the same time because those are correlated. But the user behavior signals over here are causing the rankings. Okay? So that's why I believe that SEMRush measured or found an effect of direct traffic causing rankings, and they say it's a factor. If you step back and you realize that's just a correlation, what could be causing direct traffic that might actually be causing rankings? It's user behavior. Those user behavior signals are going to be much higher for brands. And so I think that's what's happening. And that's why I think that SEMRush study is the best study by far of ranking factors that's ever been done because it uses that Clickstream data. Its data source is much better than anything else that's ever been used before. It's still not perfect. It's still a correlational study. It's still not causational. But I think it's better because the data source, the Clickstream data, was better. There's another thing I want to say about that study, and that's that I think they kind of handicapped themselves out of the gate because they used some sort of like AI. What they did was just a fancy regression analysis. They basically drove in a nail with like a nuclear weapon, like totally unnecessary. And I actually think at first I thought that was just good marketing because AI is kind of popular and, you know, people are going to think that's cool. And so like if they use this special method of effectively just doing a regression analysis that you could do anyway, that it's gonna get more buzz and stuff like that. And that may actually have happened. But I also think that actually handicapped the study a little bit and led to people not really taking it as seriously as they might have otherwise. And that's because I think it sort of distracted from the whole correlation versus causation thing. And it's sort of like, I think people said, all right, well, we're using this AI to figure out what these factors are. And the implication there is that it's like a better method than people have used in the past. And that maybe it's more causational. Maybe it's implying causation just a little bit more than they were before. And it's not. It's just a regression analysis. They probably would have got the exact same answers or very close to the same answers if they used a simple regression. And so I actually think that in the long run, that might have handicapped that study a little bit because it made people really focus on this causation idea. And that's just not something you can do with any study. If they would have just said, hey, we have better data. Here's a correlational study, just like everyone out there, just like every other ranking factor study out there. But we have all this Clickstream data, which is way better than anything else used in any of these other studies, and then just done a simple multiple regression on it like everybody else did. I think the takeaways would have been absorbed more clearly, more effectively. And I don't think people would have been sort of arguing that direct traffic drives high rankings. I think they would have saw that as a correlation as it is. But anyway, I think that study's amazing. Of all the ranking factor studies out there, that's the best one. But also remember, it's correlation, not causation. And correlation just gives you some direction or some interesting places to look that may be causing, but probably are not directly causing. Yeah, that's it, guys. See ya.